And this is my new group assignment. It still says compare and contrast essay. Compare and contrast or comparison is one of your options on this group paper, but it's not a requirement. You actually have 7 different choices in terms of the style of essay you want to write. Okay, so hopefully you and your group member or members are going to be able to find something that works for you. We have 6 in class tonight. If this is really what we're going to have, then we'll do 2 groups of 3, but we'll kind of see. All right, so if you're watching this in a future semester, of course, make sure you check your due dates. But for this semester, today, which is the 8th, the story request is due in Canvas. So what is the story request? The instructions are in it, but I just want your top 3 choices of the short stories from the list. I want to make sure that I can get you into a group with a story that interests you. Groups will be selected tomorrow. And I will also give you guys some resources for connecting with people in your groups if you have trouble meeting face-to-face. Individual work is due in Canvas on the 2nd. Now, in this class, we don't meet on the 1st, which is a Tuesday, but that's Mardi Gras week. However, I am planning that night during class time to have kind of an open question and answer session. I'll probably let my other one-on-one class in on it as well, but just keep that in mind. Then the final draft is due on the 4th, which is a Friday, so that means it's due at noon. Okay, but if you turn it in by 11:59, there really won't be a late penalty. College requires that all of my due dates on Fridays be at noon. Okay? Questions on the due dates? All right, so let's take a look at the assignment. In modern America, people are often accused of being disconnected or distant from one another. Usually the technology gets the blame for this disconnect. However, one of the wonderful things about literature is it can connect us to people who have lived in the past. Now for this assignment, you're going to write a 1,300 to 1,500 word group essay that takes one of the stories below, or potentially 2, and writes an analysis of the story or stories. Since all the stories on the list were written before 1980, so at least 40 years, the picture of the world is going to be devoid of much of modern technology. Some of these stories, cars and airplanes don't exist. A telephone was a luxury, and people still died of things like polio and smallpox and tetanus and all those horrible things. Yet, despite all this lack of technology, people still have many of the same thoughts, desires, dreams, or worries that we have today. From us, if you go back to, say, Roman times 2,000 years ago, people want good jobs. They want, their family and children to do better than they did. They want to have a nice life that's free of fear and pain and disease and all these sorts of things that really hasn't changed much about being a human being. I do expect you to incorporate some or all the writing techniques you read about in the chapters for this section. Now, we read the comparison chapter for tonight, but, exposition by example, which we're looking at next week, chapter 10, all of these types of writing fit into exposition by example, okay? Questions so far? Now, before anybody panics about writing 1,300 words, do keep in mind that at minimum, you're going to be in a group of 2. The last paper that you all did, and did pretty well, was 1,000 words. 1,300 divided by 2 is 650. So your responsibility is actually going to be less than it was on the previous paper, at least in terms of the paper is concerned. You have some individual work that I'll talk about that you'll need to do. Okay, so for this essay, you're going to give me your top 3 choices from the story list provided. In groups of 3 or 4, probably in this class 2 or 3, your group will select one of the following styles from the article that's attached to this paper. And if you're watching this online, it'll be in the modules tab or it'll be in the paper submission. So first and foremost, you can do a character analysis. How do the characters affect the story? Why are they interesting? What could they do better? What did they do that you didn't like? What did they do that you liked? A point of view analysis. Who tells this story? How does it affect the story? Think about, or we're all at least probably somewhat familiar with the Harry Potter universe, even if we haven't read the books or watched the movies. The movies and the books are told from Harry's perspective. How would that book be different if it was told from, say, Voldemort's perspective? Evil wizard trying to bring order to the world. Well, he wouldn't view himself as evil now, would he? So it does make a difference. Historical or cultural analysis. That is how a piece reflects the beliefs and values of the society that produced it, or how history can shed light on a work for modern readers. Now, since you can't use outside sources for this paper, you cannot use outside sources other than the story itself, you'd really be looking at the world that the story presents. For example, one of these stories is Jack London's To Build a Fire, which takes place during the Yukon Gold Rush in the winter around the turn of the 20th century. I hope that wasn't too loud. The history or being in that time period affects a lot of things. No satellite phone or radio. The cold weather gear wasn't quite as good. A lot of the bad decisions that the man in that story makes that lead to him freezing to death probably don't happen if you had all the modern gadgets that you can possibly have. Okay. Comparing and contrasting. You can compare and contrast a couple different stories on this list. There are some stories that have similar themes that would be interesting to look at. Imagery analysis. You could look at the pictures that the author creates. Symbolism analysis, or how things in the story simultaneously represent something else. The world is full of symbols. Okay. Some of those symbols are obvious. Some of them are not. We have religious symbols. Christians, what's the biggest religious symbol for a Christian? Cross. Wear it around your neck. You see it in churches. Would you do the same with an electric chair? They're both methods of execution, but one symbolically has a lot more meaning than an electric chair. Okay, just like if you see an apple with a bite out of it, it's Apple computers. So there are objects that can have symbolic value in a story that get to the point of what the author is trying to tell us pretty quickly. You can also do a thematic analysis. Now, all of you in your individual work are going to have to discuss a theme in the story, which is separate from your group paper, which I'll get to in a second. But a theme is a main idea or ideas that a work is trying to give to you. So, for example, a theme may be something like male and female relationships, gender roles. As you saw in Kate Chopin's story, the plight of women, or the ability of women to have control over their own lives. You have, Louise, who is looking at the prospects of freedom, because you didn't have a whole lot of freedom if you're a woman in the late 19th century. Okay. Questions on any of those styles? Now, since this is the first time that I'm doing this assignment, I'm going to have to try and dig up examples of each of these types of writing, but I will give you samples as best I can so you have something to work with. Okay? All right, so if you want to use a story that's not on the list, you must clear it with me first and have a group in mind, but it does need to be literary fiction, okay? It can't be, Star Wars fan fiction or something like that, okay? It needs to be an actual short story that was intended to be art more so than entertainment. That doesn't say art can't be entertaining, but there's a difference. Now, please don't consult any secondary sources other than previously written essays for ideas or theories. Now, what this means is what your group can use is the stuff that comes out of your brain and the story. That's it. As I'll get to in a second, there's going to be a zero tolerance for plagiarism on this paper because there's just too much out there. It's easy to copy and paste and would be a problem. Questions on that? Okay. So once you've been put in a group, you'll need to read the story closely a minimum of 2 times. You can do this as a group or read it individually and compare notes. Some groups in the past have listened to a YouTube audiobook and followed along with the story. You can do it individually and then come back with your ideas. It just depends on what you want to do. But you have to read it at least twice. Remember when we did active reading a couple weeks ago? Ideally, we read it once for content and just to get the basic plot, characters, and ideas. Then the second time, we're actually looking for themes, what the characters are doing, foreshadowing, all that sorts of stuff that we might see in a short story. Okay? And if a lot of this stuff sounds foreign to you, that's okay. We're going to be working on it throughout the unit. All right? All right. As I mentioned on the first reading, overall sense of the story. On the second and subsequent readings, take notes on the elements of the story that pertain to your focus. So after you read the story, as a group, you need to determine the main themes that you see going on in the work. A theme is defined by literarydevices.net as a main idea or underlying meaning of a literary work that may be stated directly or indirectly. So even if your focus isn't on the theme of the story, say you're doing character analysis, you're still going to have to look at what is the main point of the story, how do the characters affect that. All right? Sorry, I'm playing with the lighter in my pocket. I shouldn't be. After reading the story, select a themes or themes you wish to explore that fit the above analyses, such as family, marriage, quest, betrayal, supernatural, sin, death, love. All these sorts of things are themes. These are ideas you already know about, okay? It's just putting a technical term to it. Once you've determined the theme or themes your group wants to explore in the work, you need to brainstorm ideas for how you're going to evaluate the work. I will give you time in class next week to brainstorm and hopefully come up with a working outline for the paper, because one of the critical things for this group essay is to create an outline that everybody has access to and agrees on. Because you can say, all right, here's the introduction. Bob can write the introduction. Steve can write paragraph 1. Well, what do I write in paragraph 1? Well, here's the outline. This is what we want to do in paragraph 1. Okay? That's usually the way that this structure works the best, is if you have an outline that everybody's working on, then you know which part you're supposed to write. And then as a group, after everybody's written, you can come back and polish it. All right? But the ideas need to be presented. As much as possible, I want your group to look for ways that we connect with people other than in the past in your evaluation of the text. So in other words, these stories are not, post iPhone. They're not even post internet. So there should be some interesting things that you can examine and discuss in your papers. All right, that was a mouthful. Questions before I move on to the individual work stuff? Okay, so your individual work is going to be due on the 2nd. Your individual work is going to be a paragraph on a theme that you find in the essay. It's going to be a body paragraph that you've written for the essay, and either an introduction or a conclusion. So say you're in a group of two. One person writes the intro, the other person writes the conclusion. And you would turn that in with your group work. Why am I doing this, you ask? Well, what's a big complaint with group work? Somebody that ends up doing all the work themselves. I'm trying to build in things into the assignment to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay? I want to see that everybody's pulling their weight, and if they're not, you don't get as many points. That seems fair. You know, if you do equal work, everybody gets the same amount of points. All right, so moving on to page 2. In the grading of this paper, I'll be looking for depth of ideas and analysis, use of supporting evidence, and overall strength and clarity of the writing itself. Please note that this is not a plot summary of the story. Do not write about what happens in the story, but rather how societal issues, the past, compare to the modern world you live in, or whatever focus you have. Okay? When you're writing, assume that your reader has read the story. So we're not summarizing the plot. We're talking about the things that are going on in the story and what they mean. Think of it this way. You go to see a movie with a friend. When you leave the theater, you might talk about your favorite parts of the movie or the things you didn't like. You don't have to do the plot summary with that person because they've already seen it. Now you get home after seeing the movie with your friend, and your mom asks, "Oh, what was that movie about?" That's plot summary, okay? Telling someone who hasn't read it or seen it what happens, that's plot summary. Analysis is focusing on what the things in the piece of literature mean, okay? Questions on that? All right. Plagiarism alerts. All your work on this paper should be original. It's not necessary to use outside sources in this paper. There will be a no tolerance policy on plagiarism for this paper. So don't copy and paste from internet sources, reviews, etc. Make sure that everyone in this group follows this policy. One sentence that comes from the internet gets the paper a 0. So make sure you're doing your own work. The only thing you're quoting or discussing is the story itself. Questions on that? All right. So we kind of have the standard format checklist. You need to have a good title, answers to so what question, logically organized, grammatically sound, right number of words, formatted correctly. It should read, the final product should really read like one person wrote it. So after you guys create your individual work, you kind of need to get together and put the essay together as a group. Make sure there's transition sentences, that the paragraphs flow together well, that it's well organized. If you're in a group of 2, you're going to have to write more than one body paragraph. It's just the way it's going to happen. So I think groups of 3 will work better, but I've got to wait to see if a couple people are dropping. So, questions? All right, so the story list. I've got several stories you can pick from. Give me your top 3 choices. If you're not familiar with 3 of the stories on this list, just go home and do an internet search. Go to the library's Canvas page and search in one of the databases, and just kind of get a feel for what story you might want to use. All right, so the grade breakdown, moving down to the bottom of the page. The paper itself is worth 100 points. So that's the final product that you guys turn in on the 4th. The individual work has 3 parts, and they're listed on page 3. The first part, a discussion of the theme you've discovered in the work. So even if you're doing a character analysis, I still want you to look at the themes. So what you're going to write is a good-sized paragraph, which is about 200 words, that discusses one of the main themes you see in the story. It focuses on the issues in the story and not the ones you're necessarily discussing in the final paper. So in other words, this theme discussion is not going to appear in the final paper, at least in this form, okay? Then, as a writer, I want you guys to give 3 examples of television, film, other works of literature that exhibit this theme, okay? You don't have to do 3 of each, just 3 total. And then a couple of sentences explaining. I basically want to see that you are digging into the theme of the story and kind of thinking about it a little bit, okay? Questions on the first part? Okay, draft, introduction, or conclusion. The next thing you're going to do is provide an introduction or a conclusion for your paper. If you're in a group of 2, you're pretty much stuck with one or the other, okay? Then a body paragraph. This is a contribution that's going to end up in the final draft of the paper, okay? Now, since our groups might be small, you may end up having more than one body paragraph that you wrote, but for the sake of the individual work, just one, okay? Then, the final thing is a group evaluation. Now, we're going to be doing this in class on March 8th when we come back after you've turned in the paper. And this is going to not only be 5 points towards your individual work, but also I'm going to use this to make sure that everybody did their job in the group. If you are evaluated poorly, you can lose up to 10 points on the group paper, okay? So if somebody doesn't pull their own weight, in all likelihood, they're not going to do a great job of their individual work, and they may not get as many points as you on the final product. These are just meant to be safeguards to make sure that everybody does their work. And in the vast majority of groups, people do their work, you know. But this is just to make sure that I'm protecting the students who are doing their work, all right? Questions on this stuff? All right, so the grading rubric. There's 2 separate rubrics, one for the individual work, which you can use as a checklist, and then a pretty similar rubric to the first essay. It's 100 points, just like the first essay. The values are the same, but I'm evaluating you on your introduction, your thesis, content, organization, grammar, and mechanics, okay? On the individual work, basically, are you meeting the criteria that are listed on page 3? You know, do you have everything that those bullet points ask you to have in your paper? And I will give you a sample of the individual work. I do have that. That's not changed from the last time I did this paper. So you will have a good example of that, okay? Finally, in this packet, you have the part of the Butte College. Now, this isn't the entire article. I just cut it down to the types of essay that you can write for this paper. But whatever style you choose, make sure your group is familiar with this, and you can kind of use this as another checklist for what your paper should contain. All right, any final questions on this group essay? And do bear with me, this is, I used to do just the compare and contrast part, but I want to give groups more options so it would work better. So if you have any questions, let me know, or if something doesn't seem right or is confusing, please ask me, because that'll help future classes with the clarification that I give you. All right, so I'm going to shut off the video.